So my own opinion of Morbius is it's fairly weak, but again, I don't like the inaccuracies or even the politicized, ridiculous way it's being put out there. So if you like or dislike Morbius, I think that's fair. That can be debated. But then you have these critics. Well, let's not call them critics, they're just grifters. And probably some of the worst among them are Midnight's Edge, which started off okay, having really short documentaries on pop culture, but has soon degenerated into arguably even worse than EFAP or Geeks and Gamers, because at least they're openly vile, disgusting, stupid, and peddling ridiculous anti Semitic conspiracy theories. But Midnight's Edge is a little bit more sophisticated. They do the propaganda in a more upscale kind of way, but it's still pretty awful. So they're defending Morbius because you know what? At least it's not woke, and that's the worst thing of all time. So even if a woke story, like Watchmen is one of the greatest stories ever, well, it's woke, so it's bad. So the X-Men characters under Chris Claremont, even though he made some of the best X-Men stories, well, they're woke. So that means they're bad, even though they're actually pretty good. So yeah, the logic of hating the woke sometimes works, makes sense. When political correctness goes out of line, I think it's fine to call it out, but really just saying, oh, it ain't woke, let's defend it, can really drive you down some paths of insanity, as we're going to see.
2000s. And when you apply that formula to a comic book movie even today, whether they intend to or not, a movie that feels 20 years out of time comes out by default. So that's another reason why the critics have it in for this movie, which again, I can't fault. But some critics seem to go the extra mile in taking this down, which I speculate might be due to the lack of the message. Morbius is a movie which scores pretty darn high on the diversity and inclusion charts, so no one can attack it for that. It ticks all the boxes, even in the movie's leads. You might interject that there are 2 white males in the lead, but one of them is implied to be The movie is so inclusive that it even represented me by having my native language spoken on screen. But all of that representation is completely natural. Nothing is forced here, and there is no virtue signaling, no agenda, and no hyper-partisan ideopolitical messaging like there was in the Batman and some more recent Disney outings. And remember, in the last few weeks, Disney staff have even admitted on camera that there is indeed an overt ideopolitical agenda in their programming. That attitude is also shared by a number of professional reviewers, the same ones who will always highlight diversity and inclusion as a reason to let other issues slide, like they did with, for instance, Marvel's Eternals. But Morbius got no such free pass.
Well, where to even begin? There are so many factual things that are wrong. It's mind-numbing. But let me just do a short detour to bowing into comics, which also assures us there is no woke, there is no agenda. They didn't do any of that in this film. On the contrary, 2 major characters, complete race swaps. And if you know Bound into Comics, in Midnight's Edge, every time there's a race swap, there's an agenda, there's the message. That's what they tell us. There's race swapping of Martine, Morbius's girlfriend, who was a secretary and white and blonde, and now, nope, she's not that. Now somehow she's Indian, she's dark-skinned, she's a brunette, and she's not a secretary, she's a full-blown doctor. And then we have Stroud, who is white, completely white in the comics, and now he's black. Why is he black? Don't know. He just is. So, A, they don't know Morbius. B, they don't know Spider-Man. And C, they're completely contradicting themselves. And in fact, he's contradicting himself in this video because he says, oh, they're kind of implying that Milo's gay. Having seen Morbius, I'm like, what? I detected no subtextual hint he's gay. But if he is gay, then there is a message. And he's saying, Disney is confessing there is a gay agenda. Well, if there is a gay agenda and Milo is gay, then the film is woke and has an agenda. So, which is it? You're not making any sense at all. But honestly, more from a Spider-Man fan perspective, this thing is just offensive because they have no idea what the hell they're talking about. So the bounty in the comics is saying, yeah, they have this thing on the ship. It's kind of like in the comic. It's not like in the comic at all. Here they completely changed everything. The thing in the comic is that Morbius is confused. You can say what he did was evil, killing off the crew, but he's confused. He's been turned into, quote, a vampire. He's not a real vampire, but he's now been mutated. He kills off his crew, and yes, he fights Spider-Man, but essentially he's confused. He doesn't know what the hell's happening. Spider-Man's just at this house. He enters the house and they fight. But he's not really a villain. He's just confused. So the introduction here also doesn't make any sense. He debuted as Spider-Man villain. No, he did not debut as Spider-Man villain. He debuted as very confused protagonist who's overwhelmed by these new powers. Maybe you want to call Morbius supervillain, but that's actually a question mark. It's actually not entirely clear. But there you go, me paying attention to the comic. As far as Bounty into comics itself, it's a mess. They're saying, it's really deep, it's really good, there's no woke. And they themselves point out that the lead actress is, yes, basing the character on AOC. So you're like, this is just confusing. So I don't understand this. I guess, to be fair, for the propaganda to work, they have to be sometimes moderate and not jump on the woke button all the time. Otherwise, it does lose its sting. If every single thing is woke, then there's no point, right? You have nothing to work with. So they got to occasionally, I guess, be moderate. But Morbius is not it. It does have a message. It does have an agenda. It's just there are bigger problems with this whole thing. It's just a very, very troubled film. So yeah, there are woke aspects, and I'm a Morbius diehard fan. The race, gender swap stuff, it didn't really bother me. I mean, I really do wish, at least with Martine Bancroft, they kept it a little closer to the books, though I don't like what they ended up doing with her, which was turning her into a vampire, and Morbius tragically has to kill her. So, a lot of it didn't bother me, but some parts of it did. I think it's fine if she's a secretary. Her just being in love with Morbius is fine, but it's always been a little bit all over the place. I mean, Morbius is an American. He's not technically American in the comic. The Spider-Man animated was a little bit better. They also made him European, but he's supposed to be Greek. But in the animated series, he sounded like he was from Transylvania. Yeah, Morbius is a work in progress. I just wish they did a lot better job. They could have stuck much closer to the comics. They do have callbacks, but they don't make any sense. They've completely recontextualized everything. They have inserted a lot of virtue signaling SJW stuff, but it's kind of like standard now. They always do this stuff with a lot of these films. I'm concentrating on the story. If this stuff interferes with the story, that's what's critical. I would have to say the, whatever you want to call it, the message, whatever it is in terms of race bending or whatever, didn't interfere with the story that much because the story itself was kind of lousy. But it's definitely there. If you want to obsess and focus on that, by all means. So it's kind of curious they're being moderates here. But I think they're being moderates not in a good way. They just don't understand what they're talking about. They just don't know Morbius. They don't know this mythology. So they're saying there's no wokeness because they don't know what the hell they're talking about.